Good morning. There could be many approaches to John Donne's poetry. Today we will concentrate on the post-structuralist or the deconstructionist notion. John Donne is the most polemical of the metaphysical poets, and today I will teach you how to deconstruct his poems. Deconstruction floats four basic postulates. First, that identity is not a solid, regular, stable block. All of us stage multiple identities in progress, and that's why all that we utter is full of inner contradictions. Number two, not only human beings but also texts have a subconscious, and there is a point called aporia in the textual subconscious where all these inner contradictions lie curled up. It's almost like a gravity center of the textual subconscious. Third point that you must bear in mind, that if we want to arrive at the truth, if we want to get at the heart of the matter, we have to deconstruct this aporia or read the text against the grain in the light of caste, class, gender, race, social positions and other determinants. Now, it is not an easy task, because not only human beings, not only identity, but also the society, family, culture, history, all these postulates are multicentric and layered. They are invariably folded into each other like the different pages of an old manuscript. Then they are inseparably joined up. So, it is not very easy to locate the point of inner contradictions. But still, there are ways and means of arriving at the tentative truth. The fifth and the final thing that deconstruction establishes is that there is no hierarchy between political and personal, cosmic and commonplace, sacred and profane. You know, all these binaries are also folded up into each other. Now, this folding up business can be studied in two ways. When we read it today, when we read this snapping of hierarchies between the personal and the political, the commonplace and the cosmic, the high and the low, the romantic and the classical. When we think in terms of the snapping of hierarchies between these binaries, we apply the theory, we read it as the deepening of democracy. But in the 17th century England, in the Jacobean era where he was born, people understood this whole phenomena of snapping the hierarchy between the high and the low, the serious and the non-serious, and through the theory of correspondence. Now, what is this theory of correspondence and what does it teach you? It teaches you to see the basic unity between disparate objects, and it says that it is justifiable to juxtapose the binaries in one witty flash. So, there is no caste system in the different prongs of the binary. Witty, what Johnson calls the witty, your violent yoking together of heterogeneous opposites in John Donne's poetry can be understood through the theory of correspondence. And Hegel, there is a quotation from Hegel which will give you the background of how to interpret this theory of correspondence. I will read the quote from the text. This is from the preface of the Philosophy of the Right. When philosophy paints its grey in grey, a shape of life has grown old. It cannot be rejuvenated, but only understood. The owl of Minerva spreads his wing at twilight. This is Hegel. Now, Minerva is the Greek goddess of learning, like our Saraswati, but Saraswati rides the swan and she rides the owl. Owl here, there in the West, is the symbol of wisdom. So, what does Hegel say? He says that the owl of Minerva flaps its wing in the twilight. Now, here the aporia is the word twilight. What is the plain meaning of the sentence? That wisdom takes off, wisdom flaps its wing only when the darkness and the light meet. Now, when God permits the binaries of nature to meet, this was the 17th century explanation of the meeting of the binaries. Why should poetry not allow that in the witty juxtaposition of violent heterogeneous opposites? So, they justified it like that, and they thought that if the poet is major, greater the poet, higher his faculty to see the unity between disparate objects. So, this is the way they justified the clubbing together of opposites. And but still they also did, later on when I talk about Dryden and other critics, you would understand that there were contexts that they determined for the proper application of wit in poetry. Now, in this sense, John Donne rose above the limitations of the age, and he applied poetry even in love poems. We will come to that later. Now, this much you can bear in mind right now, that John Donne's poetry is known for its witty conceits, and in one flash they club the binaries together. Like all the binaries, not only the colloquial, like in one flash you would understand the colloquial and the bookish, the sacred and the profane, the flesh of Adam and the spirit of Christ, rational and the supra-rational, all kinds of binaries happening in a flash in only one image, one word picture. So, John Donne made a very creative use of this thing called wit. Now, instead of enhancing the list further, let me give you examples from his poems to illustrate. In one of the poems he calls his beloved the newfound America. Now, calling a beloved a newfound America is like clubbing of the opposites. Definitely you can see it for yourself. In another poem which is prescribed for you, he compares the legs of the compass to two lovers who are joined together at one end, the spiritual end, but never to meet in the physical sense. So, they lean towards each other like the legs of the canvas, but they do not meet. In yet another poem, he calls the sun busy old fool. This is the yoking together of the cosmic and the commonplace. In another poem called the Flea, he calls the body of the dead flea a marriage bed, where the blood of the lovers meets. I mean, two drops of the lovers meet. So that, and in yet another poem, he says that he compares the blushing girl, a blushing girl, to a thin scarf, the body of a blushing girl to a thin transparent scarf. And there he says that you can see through the nobility of her blood through her body. You know, this is the line. Her pure and eloquent blood speaking in her cheeks so distinctly wrought that one might almost say her body thought. It not only the blushing girls, but also his own poems stage a meeting together, a juxtaposition of the physical and the non-physical, the sacred and the profane. Now they reveal a thinking heart, a naked thinking heart. They are, if you have seen a monitor in an ICU, and how does it catch hold of the throbbing heart of the patient lying on the bed? You know, if you can recall that image, it's like a throbbing, you know, you see a throbbing thing, you know, where you can register the movement, rapid movement of the heartbeat. Similarly, when you study or deconstruct John Donne's text, you can read the movement of a naked thinking heart. So such a transparent text he has, that the rapid movement of his thoughts can be all seen registered. Ecstasy and agony and again ecstasy. He was a poet of many moods and many paths, and he was blatantly transparent. Now we'll come to the why of this transparency, and you will come to the psychoanalysis part later on, but right now we can just bear one comment of a very major author, critic, where he says that his sonnets are like the bank of a turbulent river, the banks of a turbulent river, where his contrary waves are being taken into control. So with that thing in mind, if we go to the other part of his poems, like we've talked enough of the imagery, but we'll also talk briefly about the idea of the purity of thought. John, in a classical or a romantic poem, we cannot even think of this juxtaposition of opposites, because both the romantics and the neoclassicals and the classicals believe in the purity of thought. They cannot allow carnality in a spiritual song, nor can they allow financial worries in a love poem. They cannot permit satire in a poem related to addressed to God. So these, for them, there is something called a purity of emotions and thoughts, but the metaphysicals cancel this notion of the purity of thought, and they think, and they are very realistic in assessing so, that there is nothing called purity of emotions, and attitudes and emotions can go together. We can be very deeply in love with somebody, but still, the financial worries and other social anxieties could be a part of our deeper consciousness. Now later on, T.S. Eliot referred to as discordia concourse, and all the later metaphysicals, Hopkins, Eliot, Browning to an extent, and Emily Dickinson, they also realized in the notion of the clubbing together of heterogeneous opposite, because they were realistic. They were more in tune with the idea of disparate emotions being a part of our inner world. So, not only the chaos outside, but also the chaos inside believes that our poetry should record the discordant notes and make much of it. Now, now let's come to 3 questions. Before we sit down to deconstruct these poems, we should try to realize what emotional wounds made done right the way he did. Why was his attitude towards women what it was? And third question, what kind of conviction did he float? What was the ideology that he adhered to? Now, before we come to the deconstruction of the aporias, we can go back a little into the cultural history of Jacobean England, and even before that, we can come to the personal history. As a student of Lincoln Inn, where he went to study law, he realized for the first time that he was much lower in social station, and he could never, with the circumstances and constraints that he could never rise up to the state of a lawyer, because all his classmates were from a they had blue blood in them. They were from the nobility, and they had come to study law just because they wanted to mind their states, and they had to rule their states when they went back. Little bit of legal perception could have helped them in running the state that their fathers owned smoothly. They were there just to improve their social skills, the art of falling in love, the art of saying sweet nothings to beloved, the art of appreciating a little bit of music and poetry. This is what they had come for, and they only had the prospect of rising into mighty lawyers. But John could build little arguments only in poetry. So, you would see that all his poems are basically an argument. He could not flourish. The social and financial circumstances were not such that he could have bloomed into a lawyer, but he made the best of the lessons of rhetoric and law when he sat down to compose verses. Now, and he called this inn of Lincoln Inn his nursery of poetic talent. But this nursery he was too not a very aloof from the social evils of the time. He was too sensitive a person to be aloof from whatever was going on the streets of London. Penury, unemployment, and epidemic, lots of epidemic. They had filled the streets of London with the wretched of the earth. And in one of the poems he writes, he calls that the theatres are filled with emptiness, and streets look like a woman who has delivered only yesterday. They look so lean and lanky and lackluster that they can be compared to a woman who had delivered only yesterday. What a stark comparison. it almost reminds you of the witty comparison of his own body. When he fell sick, he compared his own body to a map. He had that kind of an objectivity and humor. He said, my body has become like a map, and the doctors examining me are looking like cartographers. So such a person who could cut a joke at who could laugh at the ironies surrounding his own life would definitely make a brilliant poet that he was. So he says that I'm aware of the situation, and when he says that the streets of London look like a woman who has delivered only yesterday, there was a hint of dramatic irony there, because soon after that he lost his wife in a childbirth. After he left this Lincoln Inn, he eloped with a minor girl who was who descended from a noble family, and the whole nobility turned against him. He was denied preferment in the court. He was, you can say he was denied employment both in the court and in the church for quite some time. And he lived a life of great financial strain. He had to raise 6 children in a row, and his wife died amidst all this strain, and his 6 children went haywire. Only towards his 50s or say late 40s, he was gainfully employed as the preacher of the state-sponsored Church of England. Now, in most of the sonnets, holy sonnets, you would notice that there is a sense of guilt. He was born a Catholic, and because of practical reasons, because he was in desperate need of a job, and he had to join as a preacher. So he had to discard the Catholic faith. So there is an element of angst all the time reflected in his holy sonnets. Holy sonnets also are not are a very tense kind of a spectacle. I mean, devotion also is not is not a source of retired peace for John Donne. And as we come to the sonnets, we also realize that there is a tug of war going on. In one of the major critics says that why is he equivocal towards women? He is equivocal because he is transferring his own guilt of joining another faith to women. This disloyalty, he keeps accusing women of being not very loyal, but actually the psychoanalyst approach would be that he transferred his own guilt towards women because he has not been faithful to the order, to the church. Because in England, in Donne's time, the religious debates were not around the existence of God. Everybody had faith in the existence of God. That was a given postulate. The only religious debate was what order of faith, what church was the best to follow, what instructions were the best to follow. So all the debates flowered against that. So that kind of this is one of the psychoanalytical approaches where he says where the critic says that his own guilt he transferred to his women poets, women partners, his wife or his beloveds. There is no denying of the fact that his response to women is equivocal. He treats them as a colony, and he objectifies them, and he glorifies his own self as the commander, as the ruler, the prince of all states. But when we go deeper, navigate deeper into the text, we can understand a greater anxiety. we can also appreciate the fact that, you know, he at least is better than most of his contemporaries. He, you know, appreciates the some intelligence in the beloved. You know, somebody who is cracking very difficult jokes, is telling narrating in terms of difficult parables, who is raising analogies, very difficult emblems and analogies in his poems, and who is also making use of very scholarly conceits, would definitely expect the lady love to be at least intelligent enough to appreciate it. And John, you know, we can, at least he is better than John Dryden, who criticizes him. I will read out the quote from Dryden to understand that, you know, at least this element of intelligence which John Donne appreciated in women, Dryden did not approve of. And I will read out the quote. Dryden said, "He affects the metaphysics not only in his satires, but in his amorous verses, where nature only should reign, and perplexes the minds of the fair sex with nice speculations of philosophy, when he should engage their hearts and entertain them with softness of love." For Dryden, the abundance of wit in a love poem is the waste of wit. He does not expect women to appreciate the difficult puzzles in the poem. But what does Donne say? Juxtapose this quote from Dryden against that, and you would understand that he understands, he expected some intelligence in the women partners. So he says, this is a quote from one of his, you know, he was one of his sermons. He says, "Love between man and woman can confess a satiety, unless she sometimes talks with him, and talks intelligently." In another preaching, he realistically considers that intelligent talks resolves many problems in interpersonal life. In marital discord, it comes to your rescue if you have a intelligently talking wife. And then he says, intelligent talk could dispel any kind of cloud that arise between two married people. Some unkindness, some misinterpretations may sometimes sprinkle a little sourness and spread a thin washy cloud upon them. A marriage may be shaken sometimes by perverseness of servants, impertinences of children, private whisperings, and clumsiness of strangers. And here also an intelligent dialogue could dispel the cloud between the man and wife. So he is the one who appreciates the importance of intelligence in women. Now, most of his love songs are like a dramatic monologue. Of course, you do not listen to women talking, but you understand that there is a context where some kind of a resistance, some kind of a denial has been staged. Women have the guts to, you know, say no. They have said no, and from there off takes the discussion. He builds up a syllogism, a whole argument against what women say. So this is something, I think, for the 17th century England, this also was a departure. We must give this much of credit to John Donne, that, you know, he appreciated intelligence in women, and he thought that women were capable of intelligent exchanges. Now we will come to the texts. Now, when we sit down to examine the aporias of the text, we would try to figure out how he transcended, to what extent he was the product of his age, and beyond what beyond that how much did he rise above the what limitations of the age. This is what marks his height up as an eminent poet. Now he was born in Elizabethan England in 1573 and died in the prime of Caroline era 1631. His writing career happened during the first 50 years of the Jacobean era. This era was torn with religious and many kinds of financial broils. Now, it was mainly the satiric tinge of the Jacobeans and the dramatists like Chapman, etc., Webster also, that provide the satiric tinge to his sonnets and songs and even hymns. This was the age when skepticism had started cooling off the youthful blood of the Renaissance, and some kind of a tear had started appearing between the mind and the senses. Scholastics also had a role to play, but basically it was the Machiavellian philosophy or the philosophy of Hobbes and Descartes that led to and also nourished and nurtured the debates determining the role of intellect and rationality in human existence. Now, most of his poems exercise or staged that debate, and so to that extent he is very loyal to his age that he happens to see he examines the experience through different rationalist stands, and he also observes the cross fertilization of the different dimensions of an experience. Like he analyzes, he deconstructs, he himself deconstructs an experience, and layer after layer he thrashes it out. What all he examines it under a lens, any kind of an experience, the antics of the lover. He examines even his he is so self-reflexive that you can easily take him for a modern man. Who is a modern man? A modern man is one who is not governed by narrow loyalties, and he is also a man who can turn back on himself, examine himself. So, even the most subjective of his poems have this kind of an analytical discourse inherent in them. That's why T.S. Eliot called him a poet of the felt thought. This is what he wanted to establish when he said that his poems reflect or radiate a unified sensibility. So, he is a poet who is not ashamed of his libido. Here is a poet who is not ashamed of the fact that he has a thinking heart, and he has also got some glands which secrete. He is as much physical as metaphysical. He is not ashamed of being human. So, this is something that gets us very close to him, and because he examines his own postulates time and again. So, there is a tension happening between words. I mean, almost like before words, tortured syntax and images, they are huddled up together like the different cosmic entities before a big bang. So, you can this kind of a tension you can study. I will give you examples. I will read out the text to see what I mean. Like take up the Holy Sonnet first. And look at the use of verbs here. There is a string of verbs happening. I'll read the poem and then deconstruct it for you. Batter my heart, 3% God, 3%, you aware the what is the three person? God, Godhead and the Spirit, Holy Spirit. Matter my heart 3% God for you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine and seek to mend. So many verbs in one string, shooting at, and shooting at the addressee. I mean, that I may rise and stand and overthrow me and bend. Now here it's important for you to realize that Almighty is been trivialized, or he has been brought down to the human level or humanized as a tinker, as a silversmith, as a tatera, who mends the utensils for you. I don't know if you've seen a tatera or a tinsel or a silversmith, but your mothers might have seen it. They are the people who do some kind of a patchwork on broken utensils. Now he says that my heart is a broken utensil and you have to descend upon me, you have to mend this heart like a tinker, like a silversmith, and you have to use force, because if you mildly tinker, if you use your hand, you batter myself very tenderly, I'll not mend my ways, I'll not be molded. I am a very hard nut to crack, and you will have to apply force. If you really want to make me and shape me anew, then you will have to apply. And then he gives a list of these are all. This is a sentence. Most of the sentences even in the Holy Sonnet are of comparative, imperative mood. Imperative mood is the mood where you command or request somebody with force. Now these are all sentences of imperative mood, and all these verbs he uses in a row. How many words? Let's count. Batter, then knock, breathe, shine, seek to mend, rise, stand, overthrow and bend. Like a tatera, like a utensil mender, like a silversmith, you have to apply your tools, you have to apply your little hammers, you have to even melt me using your force and your warmth and your heat. So, and you have to put me in a furnace to shape me anew. You have to make me suffer quite a lot to shape me anew. So, you do that. You're forced to break, blow, burn and make me new. So, these are all very violent kind of verbs, and in one, if you've read Hemingway, you would notice that he writes a very urgent kind of a prose. His prose, his sentences are all telegraphic. I mean, in telegraph, I don't know if you've ever seen a telegraph. Now it's a different kind of an age, but you go to your parents and ask them what a telegraphic language used to be. Like short sentences, urgent sentences, you didn't have the patience to even complete the sentences. I mean, middle way you left them because you had to pay for every word. But they reflected, and generally telegrams were sent when somebody was dead, somebody was not well. So there was a sense of urgency. Now this kind of a telegraphic prose Hemingway wrote, because he wrote about war fronts and other urgent situations. Now John Donne uses that kind of a, not prose, that kind of an urgency when he uses so many verbs in a row. So that the same kind of, urgency which Kabir Das says, uses, I mean in his poems, where Ram ki bahuriya, Ram mero bhartar, he says. So he with that kind of a raw energy, he calls God that I am the bride of Christ. You are the one who is to be. First he uses the image of a silversmith, and then he says that you are like a ruler, de facto ruler, who has been betrayed by the viceroy of reason. You had employed the viceroy of reason in my being, but he failed you. He did not take care to rule well, and that's why satanic agency invaded my being. And now because this viceroy of reason has failed you, now the satanic agencies have overpowered me and they have imprisoned me, and like you are, what kind of a chivalrous lover you are, oh God, that you are not coming to rescue to my rescue. You are not coming for the release. So you must take an advance. You must come running. There should be an urgent force that you should apply in casting me anew. And he calls himself a usurped town. He says, like, my whole being is like a usurped town, and only you can release me from the clutches of Satan. If only you make love, like when the way Kabir Das says, "Main Ram ki bahuriya, Ram mero bhartar." He says, I will be impure. I'll become pure only when you ravish me, when you take me as a bride, when you use physical force and you almost rape me. This is a paradox. So he always think like Kabir Das. He also uses paradox, lots of paradox, because there are so many contrary thoughts running like a jaguar in him. So next image, I like an usurped town to another due. Who is this another? The Satan. Labor to admit you. I am at least have the guts to say that I love you. To another due. Reason your viceroy in me should defend but is captive. The reason that you employed in me has been held captive. Now he is of no use to me. So it's an emergency kind of a situation, and you only come running. Should defend but is captive, and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but I am betrothed unto your enemy. Now chivalry is something that is highlighted here. In most of these olden texts, women always use this kind of a language. They say, challenge the manliness of their lovers and said, what kind of a man are you that I'm in trouble and you're not coming to my rescue? So the same kind of a vocabulary is using for God. But I am betrothed unto your enemy, divorce me, untie, again the string of verbs, and break that knot again. That knot is the aporia here. And what is the knot? What is whatever the compromise he has entered. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free. My freedom lies in being betrothed to you. I am mere bandhan mein hi meri mukti hai. My salvation lies in my being tied down to you. Marital knot should be tied between my soul and your super soul. And nor ever chase except you ravish me. Only when you establish physical contact, when you make this marriage possible, when you consummate this marriage, only then I'll be a real pure self again. So this is a post-lapsarian thing, but he is still expecting God for the pre-lapsarian innocence to happen. The next poem, the next two poems are love poems, and the simpler one is the sun rising. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why doest thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? I'll give you the summary first. He says he is rebuking the sun because for peeping into the lover's nest. He is locked up in his bedroom, and like an old servant, he is peeping into the room, and he says, why are you peeping? Why are you acting like a peeping Tom? And he says that, we have a self-sufficient world. Lovers have a self-sufficient world. They are complete in themselves and they don't need intruders. And then he talks about the microcosm that, establishes a kind of analogy between the microcosm and the macrocosm. He says, if your duty, then he takes pity on like a feudal lord, he first rebukes the sun and then takes pity on the son. He says, if of course you have been assigned this duty to roam around the world. That was the time when it was believed that the sun roams around the earth. Now he says that, okay, they have, so he is under that belief, and he says, okay, your job, you have been assigned this duty to roam around the world, then you roam around us, because we are the microcosm, we are the essence of the world, we are the world. And so if you take a round of our room, your job will be done. You are a tired, oh son, you are a tired old servant, so you deserve rest. So like in India, in Indian mythology, there is a story where Ganesh takes a parikrama of Shiva and Parvati. Kartikeya runs away to different horizons, because there is a competition led, you must have read this story. Shiva says that, if you take a round of the world, I'll declare you as my favorite son. And then Ganesh, because he's heavy, and now he's not a martial god, so he uses his intelligence. He says, okay, I'll take a go around your Shiva and Parvati, my parents. I'll go around my father, and my father and my mother, they together make my whole world. So in moving around my parents, I'll be actually traveling around the world. So he uses his intelligence and captures the love of his parents. So similarly, this kind of logic he uses. He says, okay, we are the world. So you take a round of the world and your job is done. And then he says, then he makes then there is a Freudian slip where he betrays his, his patriarchal and his colonial impetus. He says, saucy, pedantic wretch, go child, late school boys and sour apprentice, go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride. That was the time when he had his clash on with the king and the nobility. So he says, if you have to wake these people up, these busy for nothing people, go and make them busy. But we are happy this way. Love all alike, no season knows, nor clime, no climate, nor hours, days, months, which are the ranks of time. We have risen above the space. We have risen above the notion of limiting time. We have risen above time and space, and we damn care. We are a self-sufficient unit. Thy beams so reverent and strong, why shouldest thou think, why my beloved's eyes, here is a conceit, are brighter than your rays. If she winks, your light would be denied to you, and if she opens her eyes, then you'll go to damnation. Because so this is the heightened, this is a hyperbole. Thy beams, I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. Even my eyes, if I wink, you will be eclipsed. But that I would not lose her sight for so long. But I am not the kind who is, I don't have the time in the world to look at you even with one eyes. So I am concentrating, I'm all eyes on her. So that's why you are radiating your life. If her eyes have not blinded thine, look, and tomorrow late tell me whether both the India of spice and mine. Now this was the time of colonial extension. People had started sending ships to India. So both these Indias of ships and mine, this is like a colonial change. Like he says, go and take a survey of the wider world. How England is reaching out to the wider world. Well, whether both the India of spice and mine be where thou leftest them, or lie here with me, because I am the lord of the riches now. All the mines means minerals, and all the riches of that ships carry back to India are now under my control, because he's used them metaphorically. He says that we are the, Kabir Das also says, Jako kachu na chahiye, so he shahanshah. The real Lord is one who cares for nothing, who desires nothing. So as lovers, we have, we give two hoots to the world, and that's how, with that logic, we are the rulers of the earth. But then he betrays his, his patriarchal self when he says, "She is all states and all princes I, nothing else is. Princes do but play us compared to this. All honors is mimic, all wealth alchemy." He says alchemy was the science of converting everything into gold. It was people, alchemists took very abortive, efforts. But yes, of course, poetry refers to all these false beliefs also, because it's a part of the mythology and the racial consciousness, so it doesn't deny it. He doesn't examine it on the rational grounds. He says that, okay, but he says that, he objectifies the beloved as states, commodifies her like the states, the colonies. And he says, glorifies himself as the ruling partner. He says, "I'm the ruler." So here he betrays, there is a Freudian slip here, that he is not treating her as an equal. "Thou son art half as happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. Thine age asks ease, and since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us." Now we are the world, if the glories of the world lie contracted in us, because these alchemists, they all thought that they could bring the essence of the world in a test tube. So everything like our Kavirajas and Vedacharyas, like Ayurvedacharyas or the Vaidyaraj, they say फला चीज में अश्वगंधा में हल्दी की भावना मिलाकर. They use a very, the bhavana is something so abstract. Bhavana is the feeling. Now, but this is the language that Vaidyajis actually use in India. I have seen them using. They say, फला चीज में फला चीज की भावना मिलाते हैं. I mean, how do you mix that bhavana? So what does he want to say? That the essence of it, it's so sukshma, it's so minute, it's so minor, it's so subtle that it's almost like the abstracted form. It's almost like the feeling, the bhavana. So he says, alchemists also use this kind of a vocabulary. He says that all the essence of the world lie contracted in us. We are the test tubes. We are the epitome of the glories of the earth. And in everything, the best of the world has got amalgamated in us. So this is the logic. So he says, and the warmth that love stands for gets us close to you, because you also radiate warmth and we also radiate warmth. And of course, you've given up some kind of a sensual pleasure by warming us up. So we thank you. First, like a feudal lord, he scolds the servant, and then he also pampers him a little, and then he says, okay, your job in Ram, you go back and shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, this is the epicenter of the universe. Our bed, the personal and the political have been, they have, the hierarchy has been snapped away. These walls thy sphere. We have made a little room in the sonnets. We are a self-sufficient unit, and there could be a little hierarchy between me and my wife, but there is other hierarchies we have done away with, and your job is done by playing warm and good to us. Now the third poem is called Valediction Forbidding Mourning. He is talking with the confidence of a man who knows that he is good. As valediction is the, when you are parting. When you are parting, generally you pull a very long face, because you think that that's the end of the world, especially now that you also have long distance love affairs. Your partner may be at the other end of the world and you could be sitting here, and still you could be connected, but through internet and other things. But now that was a time when people, when they traveled, they never knew whether they would be meeting again. And that's why in our regional literature, Indian literatures also, we have so many Vyoginis. We have so many Vyog songs in Vidyapati, in Surdas, in many of the poets, even Kabir Das, because the women are all left alone and men go away. never to come back again. So they when they part, they mourn. They know that there could be no meeting. So, but here he says, okay, you don't have to mourn. You don't have to. We are, we are like the two legs of a compass. Even if we are separated, we will be leaning towards each other. And what is the role of a compass? The role of the compass is to show the way to the navigators, the people who sail far long distances. They carry a compass, and the role of the compass is very noble. It leads kindly light. It shows you the right way. So lovers are the best example. They show the right way to the world, and they are always tilted towards each other. Physically they may not be together, but spiritually they are always leaning towards each other. So this kind of a logic, this kind of an argument, if you split it into a syllogistic structure, the major premise would be death, true lovers are taller than death. Minor premise, we are true lovers. Conclusions, so we are taller than death. This is the syllogistic pattern that he adopts. He says death is a great insult to human ego. In the famous death sonnet also he says, death thou shalt die. And here also he says that death, it's beyond you to kill us or separate us. Or and so why mourn? Once we are united spiritually, the flesh of the Adam and the spirit of the Christ, once they are one, there is no use of mourning, because like our own Gita says that death is only like a comma. We change bodies like tattered clothes. So there should be no mourning. And the same logic he applies in a different way. In the first half of the poem, he says that dignified people, they pass away with dignity. They have a grand exit. Most of his love poems could be called a contemplation or an argument of a thinking heart and a thinking body in search of a partner, a friend, a lover, a beloved, who could be a co-producer of self-realization, who could be an active partner, and who could also be a witness to the whole complex process of self-realization. What makes him a womanist is his faith in women's intelligence. And on the whole, it is the poetry not of the equality of ratio, but of the anomaly. It's a poem not of analogy, but of anomaly. And here is a poem, to read John Donne is to understand, know, forget, erase, remember, question, accept, reject, do all kinds of things together. It's a kind of entering a prosopoeia. It's stirring up the half thoughts, half ideas and dark emotions. He, through masterfully unconventional idioms, what does he do? He actually underlines our quizzical sense of being. And you read the poem and you would understand that he leaves us freezing on a point where nihilism and mysticism, terror and humor, anger and celebration meet. And this is what makes him so modern, so close to our sensibilities, that even students sit up when they read their texts. The level of identification is so deep, so magnificent. Then if you read it aloud and read with your soul and heart, you would still find a John Donne twirling in your whole being.
Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? saucy pedantic wretch, go chide late schoolboys and sour prentices, go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride, call country ants to harvest offices. Love all alike, no season knows nor clime, nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. Thy beams so reverend and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink? But that I would not lose her sight so long. If her eyes have not blinded thine, look, and tomorrow late tell me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou leftest them, or lie here with me. Ask for those kings who thou saw'st yesterday, and thou shalt hear all here in one bed lay. She's all states and all princes, I, nothing else is. Princes do but play us, compared to this all honours mimic, all wealth alchemy. Thou son art half as happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. Thine age asks ease, and since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy centre is, these walls thy sphere. Batter my heart, 3% God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like a usurped town, to another due, labour to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. As virtuous men pass mildly away, and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say, no. So let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move, to a profanation of our joys, to tell the laity our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears, men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of these fears, though greater far, is innocent. Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soulless sense cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. But we by a love so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, interassured of the mind, care less eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls therefore which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul the fixed foot makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun.